All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining. Good afternoon, happy Friday. So today it's Earth Action Day. We're really excited, switching things up a little bit this year, trying to support actions from home. If you don't know me, I'm Emily Reinhard. I'm the Manager of Sustainability Services with Great Forest. I spent the last 3 years with a team based in DC and just joined the New York office in January. So just in time to be at the epicenter of the crazy, but it's been good. And so you all are here because Wednesday was the 50th anniversary of the first Earth Day. So today we're looking to reflect on the last 50 years, but we also want, we'd like the takeaway to be more forward thinking, and it's a bit of a call to action. So if you couldn't guess, I'll be moderating today's webinar, which will include a few of my colleagues. We have James Bernard from San Francisco, Kaylin Dyer in New York, and Josh Rappaport, who's based out of DC. So we generally focus most of our work in the context of commercial office buildings, retail, but since so many of us are working from home right now, we wanted to build on that, and we thought it was important to switch things up for Earth Day and be a bit more topical. So we wanted to reframe our efforts to the at-home environment. And so since we focus on zero waste within our own lives, and it's something we're all personally really passionate about, and think it's really important to practice what we preach, we were really excited to have the opportunity to share all this insight that we don't generally get to because we're talking about things in the office context. So we're looking forward to telling you more about what we do at home. And so we will have a Q&A at the end. So if at any point during the presentation something comes up or you have a question, you can put that in the Q&A tab, and I will address at the end. I'll try to get to everything. If there's something that's not answered, we'll send an email with those answers to everyone who joined. And so our first presenter is James, and how do I describe James? He's quite literally lived and breathed environmental stewardship for longer than I've been alive. He's worn countless number of hats throughout his career, and he's a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of anecdotes, and he is here to speak about his experience as a student on the first Earth Day. So that's, I think, is really cool. And he's going to talk about, a little bit about what's happened in those 50 years since the first Earth Day, how far we've come, and also how far we have yet to go. So without further ado, James.
Thanks, Emily. My involvement with the first Earth Day started well before 1970. My maternal grandfather wooed my grandmother in his canoe and mule packed back into the Sierra Nevada in the 1940s and was a charter member of the Sierra Club. But he was also an active composter, and he convinced my father to compost as well. So I grew up playing in the duff under all our fruit trees. And I was born on Rachel Carson's birthday. I can vividly recall staying up late to watch the 1962 CBS Reports presentation of her findings from her book, Silent Spring, which was an indictment of the impact of chemical pesticides on the environment, particularly birds. And she presented the story of DDT thinning the eggshells of the brown pelican, the bald eagle, the peregrine falcon. So fast forward to January 28th of 1969. That's when Platform A, an old oil rig in the Santa Barbara Channel, blew out, and really served as the catalyst for the first Earth Day. Gaylord Nelson, who was then the Democratic senator from Wisconsin, flew over the oil spill and saw it firsthand from the air. Also was inspired by the Vietnam War protest teach-ins and envisioned a nationwide environmental teach-in with the goal of capturing energy from an emerging public consciousness about air and water pollution. He reached out to California Republican Congressman Pete McCloskey to join him in a bipartisan action, and they hired a young activist named Dennis Hayes to be the national coordinator of what came to be called Earth Day. And on the FM radio, there was Joni Mitchell singing about farmers needing to put away their DDT and to give me some spots on my apples, but please leave me the birds and the bees. And then famously, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. We envisioned in the spring of 1970, as a high school senior, 3 of us convened a committee to organize an Earth Day event. And we wanted to invite a marine biologist. They were in short supply. So I resorted to inviting the local head lifeguard instead and asked him to talk about how beach water quality was impacted by rainy season sewage overflows into Santa Monica Bay where we were surfing, and why those beaches had to be closed for public health reasons. We made posters for the hallways. We held an assembly for 2,000 students, and we collaborated on a newspaper article in the student paper. I carried a trash can around the grassy areas of the campus during lunch to encourage people to clean up rather than leaving remains of their lunch on the lawns as they normally did. We took a lot of teenage abuse, and we did succeed in keeping the campus clean for a whole 2 weeks, which was a small transitory raising of consciousness. The bigger picture was that Earth Day drew 20 million people in the United States, 1 in 10 Americans, 100,000 people in New York City alone, 2,000 colleges, 10,000 primary and secondary schools hosted education events. And we all together put the issue of environmental protection permanently onto the national political agenda. Some 400 organizations were created that day as well. On the legislative side, that November, the Dirty Dozen anti-environment members of Congress were defeated. And in December, Congress passed the Clean Air Act with 1 dissenting vote. The early part of the 70s is just a hit parade of environmental law, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, the establishment of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. DDT was banned, lead was removed from gas, the Toxic Substances Control Act was passed, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and my personal favorite, the Environmental Magna Carta, the National Environmental Policy Act. And together, all of these actions transformed America more fundamentally than any other governmental action, with maybe the exception of the New Deal. The legacy of the first Earth Day and I coincided in
Oh, James is back. Yay. Hey, James, we lost you there for a second.
not what happened there.
Great.
Working at the Ecology Center of Ann Arbor was an interesting experience. The Ecology Center ran Hi.
I guess it wouldn't
Um,
be
and
quarantine.
so we had to go out on the trucks once. Yeah. Am I coming through or not?
I hear you now.
I got a message that my internet connection is unstable. Always a good thing. Anyhow, did some work for the Ecology Center, learned how to recycle, sort materials, wrote grants for the first Household Hazardous Waste Collection Day in Ann Arbor and a regional Great Lakes conference. Coming back to Earth Day in 1990, the organizers wanted to broaden the event out. They took it global, mobilized 200 million people in 141 countries. More than 1 million people attended a celebration in New York Central Park. A rally on the steps of the Capitol in Washington, D.C. drew 200,000. The 90s reached all-time highs for membership in environmental organizations. Earth Day 1990 gave a big boost to recycling efforts worldwide. Nevertheless, because the idea of Earth Day was not new, the organizing effort in 1990 lacked the freshness of discovery and didn't engender the same kind of entrepreneurial activism as the 1970 event. The organizers in 1990 didn't promote a specific policy agenda. They framed the event in ways that pushed people to make simple, immediate, and conspicuous demonstrations of commitment to the environmental cause. They sought to enlist people in a well-defined movement, not to empower them to work out their own vision of how they might make a difference. And subsequent Earth Days were much more oriented to celebrations of progress and much less oriented toward teach-ins, although the 2017 Earth Day
James, can you hear us? The 2017 Earth
Yeah, I'm back.
We last got 2017 Earth Day.
Okay. Where we are now, 5 decades after the first Earth Day, calls to make every day an Earth Day, and I'm guilty of that, just as many of us are. Predictably follow every annual tree planting or trash pickup event. Corporations, as you see the slide, use Earth Day to greenwash their products, and okay, but we have become complacent and we trusted incrementalism and we've run out of time. And that Hallmark card type of Earth Day holiday has to be recycled, reinvented, and reinvigorated. We all face many urgent issues today, but only climate change poses an existential and irreversible threat to the habitability of the planet. Today, as in 1970, the most intense, emotional, affective state.
All right, James, if you can hear us, we should probably. Hey, James, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's going in and out enough where, do you have a last thing to add we got some of the important points, luckily.
Yeah, I'm basically calling out the environmental movement and the Earth Day Network to embrace reinvention of the day that climate demands. Earth Day needs to become a symbol of how radically things must change, and we have to seize opportunities to vote for policy changes and find opportunities to act individually to recommit ourselves to meaningful change. And for example, it's important for all of us to understand the impact of single-use plastics, but our mantra has been reduce, reuse, recycle, and that needs to change to reduce, refuse, reuse, recycle, and rot.
So rot would be composting organics. Thank you, James. I like all the words. They're my favorite words. Yeah, so I just finished your sentence about rot. Thank you, thank you.
Yeah, it's our first call to action is to get informed.
Yes. So climate actions, we picked 7 that especially resonated with us and looked at them through a zero waste lens. And so I'd like to give you all a quote that I especially appreciate, that I think really well encapsulates the importance of, but also the difficulty in addressing issues. So Muir said that, quote, "When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe," right? So, you know, if you're talking about today, there's these connections between the coronavirus and climate change and air pollution, right? So that, and it's that same intrinsic connection between human health and environmental health that sparked the first day and first Earth Day in 1970. And so when we're, you know, quote, bending the curve to reduce the spread of COVID-19, it's really critical that we don't lose sight of that bigger picture, that, you know, we're in the middle of a very real and important climate crisis. So we have a picture of the difference. So this is Delhi. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this. You know, it's very stark contrast between, you know, what the air pollution shows in Delhi compared to when the world essentially has shut down because of COVID-19. And so, you know, all around the world, we're seeing air pollution dropping dramatically. And when we're inundated with, you know, more grim news, it's really nice to see these pictures, you know, like, oh, Mother Nature is getting a little bit of a break. And it definitely, you know, makes me happy to see it, even though the whole picture is not the greatest. But, you know, the reality is that this is only temporary, and the pollution levels could spike right back up if we don't take, you know, climate action seriously. So I think now is a really good time to take this as an opportunity, because we are home and we are, you know, a little bit more solitary and paying more attention to our physical space and what we're doing and how we're operating. And so, you know, we see this as a really good time to reassess our current habits and to develop new ones. So our intention is to support climate action, to celebrate Earth Day through zero waste thinking and creating healthy habits at home, which can then be transferred to the office once we do go back. And so with that, our next presenter is Kaylin, who will be discussing the first 4 steps to climate action. She advises Great Forest clients throughout New York City, and Kaylin focuses on making sustainability goals achievable and empowering through education and implementing best practices. Kaylin's a native of Northern Virginia, and she became interested in our food system. She worked on several small-scale agriculture operations in the Shenandoah Valley. It's beautiful if you've never been to the Shenandoah Valley. And so those experiences working on those operations really served as a platform for her to understand those connections between, our food system, waste management, and the greater environmental system. So, through food, she could see that circular economy at work really clearly. So, Kaylin, I'll leave it to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily, for that great introduction. And thank you, James, for the call to action. Hopefully some of the next tips will give you all some ideas of how you can implement that action into your life right now. I will say that a lot of these suggestions are, you may not be able to apply to your current situation given a change in lifestyle that we're all experiencing. But it is a great time to think more creatively about what you can do and how you may be able to adjust some of these to your life at home currently. So having said that, the first step is to get informed. And climate change is not somewhere in the future, it's in our neighborhoods as we speak, and we're seeing its effects in events like hotter days, shorter winters, and fiercer storms. So understanding the big picture and how your individual efforts can contribute to the greater good is super important during this time. And you all have joined this webinar, which is a great first step in getting informed on these issues. So like Emily said, a lot of these tasks or suggestions will be focused around the concept of zero waste. So one of the first steps in getting informed is to figure out how much waste you're actually producing on an individual level. And now is a great time to do that because a lot of what you're generating is going to be in your home. So just take a quick assessment of what you're seeing a lot of in your waste bins, and maybe think about opportunities that you can reduce and reuse what you already have. So additionally, a lot of waste management information varies according to the jurisdiction that you all might find yourself in. I know a lot of us presenting today are out of New York City. So that's another opportunity for you to get informed aside from some of the advice that I might be providing right now. At this point, we're going to pause for a second for a quick poll that you all can participate in. And all of the, we'll pause along these 7 steps for a couple polls, and the answers will be discussed during the question and answer section at the end of the webinar. So just take a minute and read through and select what you think the best response is. Great. Okay, so moving on to the second climate action. This is understanding your food print. So food is a huge portion of our waste and global impact. Food production is responsible for 1/4 of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. And this just emphasizes the impact that a personal change in diet can have on your global greenhouse gas emissions. So I've kind of broken this into 2 sections, one being consumption and one being waste. So starting with consumption, we'll start with your food print, which refers to the greenhouse gas emissions produced by growing, harvesting, processing, transporting, cooking, and disposing of all the food that you eat. And there are many, many different resources to calculate your food print at varying degrees of intensity. One of the more simple food print quizzes is here on the screen here. This is generated by the New York Times. And so, for example, if we look at lunch, you would answer which of the 4 you think best fits with what you would normally eat for lunch. In this case, hamburgers and fries would have the largest footprint because the resources that it takes to generate a hamburger patty are much higher than that of a pita wrap with hummus, falafel, lettuce, and tomato. And so that brings me to how, after you see this impact that you have from your footprint quiz, you'll probably notice that cutting out meat and dairy are the most effective way to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions on a personal level. And it's important to note that meat and dairy can be produced in many different ways, but generally speaking, this is the most streamlined way to cut back on your footprint. And so I challenge you all to reduce the amount of meat and dairy that you're consuming on a daily basis, and then maybe just pick one meal out of the week and increase the frequency of that if you find that that's something that is realistic for your current lifestyle. So that's the deal with consumption. And now moving more towards waste. 40% of the food supply in the US is wasted according to the USDA. And here in New York, 34% of the average New York waste stream is comprised of divertible organic waste, which unfortunately usually ends up in landfills. And a lot of that waste can actually be repurposed for nutrient-rich soil amendments or turned into clean and renewable energy. So when it comes to food waste, there's a great opportunity to focus on solutions for reduction. So one of the first steps that I challenge you all to do when it comes to food waste is really focusing on buying only what you need, especially during these times when we're at home. There's a lot of emphasis on stockpiling food, but I challenge you to shop with recipes in mind and really only buying what you need. Having said that, another great step is donating food. So if you do find that you've stockpiled a lot of food during this time that you don't see yourself using in the foreseeable future, it's a great opportunity to donate to your local food banks. And we also have a bunch of resources about that as well. And finally, the third option is to compost and set up an organics diversion program. Although a lot of these systems are in flux right now with COVID-19, you should still start thinking about how you could implement food scrap collection at home, and maybe think about how you can encourage your employer to roll out some sort of organics diversion program if and when you return to the office. So at this time, we will stop for another poll. Alrighty, so moving on to the third climate action step. This one is a challenge to shop smarter. So the image in the following slide shows what our current production cycle looks like for a lot of the materials and goods that we use on a daily basis, starting with resource extraction and ending a lot of times as waste in a landfill. And you can see how recycling and donation puts it back into what we call the circular economy. And so when it comes to shopping smarter, I'd like to challenge you to really look into making purchases that support a circular economy rather than a linear one. And what I mean when I'm referring to the circular economy is a design process that removes waste and pollution as much as possible and keeps materials and products in use. And this allows a lot of our natural systems to regenerate because we're not constantly extracting virgin materials. So when you're purchasing, this is a great opportunity to consider the material life cycle of any object or product that you're purchasing. So how often will you use this object? Can it be recycled, repurposed, or reused multiple times? And is it sourced from virgin materials? So really thinking about that cradle to cradle practice versus cradle to grave. And some examples of this are shopping for natural textiles like cotton, linen, and hemp over synthetic fibers, which often cannot be repurposed into new clothing. And I really would like to emphasize, if you do have the opportunity to purchase goods that have recycled content in them, this is a great way to support the circular economy. And then moving on to the fourth step, this pairs nicely with shopping smarter. And this one is investing, divesting, and showing your support. So we have a lot of power to vote with our dollar as consumers. And I challenge you all to support companies that are driven by sustainability and committed to transparency. And many times, if you support local businesses, you'll also be able to be supporting a company that's more transparent as well. So those do go hand in hand. This can be a super overwhelming challenge, I understand, just because we support so many companies with our dollar and it requires a lot of research. So one of the best ways to get started with this challenge is to select a couple of environmentally preferable purchasing policies. We call these EPPs, and there are a couple listed on the screen here, and you can go beyond these. So I challenge you all to pick maybe 2 or 3 that you implement during your next shopping trip, and really look to see if you can integrate these into your life and vote with your dollar on these issues. Another great way to educate yourself and become an educated consumer without being super overwhelmed is using the Boycott app, which is on this slide here. So this app you can download on your phone, and it's a barcode scanner for almost all goods that you'll see in your general grocery store. And when you scan the barcode, it'll tell you a lot about the product and the company. And you can also select certain campaigns that you want to support within the app as well. So it's a great place to start in becoming an educated consumer. And finally, I challenge you all to, if you are lucky enough to have investments or pensions, to take this step to the next level and pledge to separate them from fossil fuel assets and increase your stake in clean energy companies. And for this step, you can even go beyond yourself and encourage your company or an organization that you're a part of to do the same. So those are the first 4 climate action steps. And at this time, we'll pause for another poll. And from there, Emily will introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Kaylin. I am pulling up our Back to Nature poll. Give you guys a minute to do that while I'm introducing Josh. So here to share some insight on the latter set of actions that we are presenting is Josh Rappaport. When he's not traveling across the country supervising our national waste audits, he's DC based. And when he's home, you may or may not find him answering morning emails from his kayak in the middle of the Potomac. So or also finding inspiration from unexpected places like Slovenia. So I figured Josh would be a good person to talk about getting back to nature. We're all nature lovers, but Josh, I think, exemplifies that. And so I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction, Em. And I definitely do agree that I'm always able to find some lessons in nature, you know, and I think that's the big thing, is that it's more critical than just being able to find an escape somewhere. It's kind of the lessons that are transferable to a number of areas in life, and whether that be closed loop systems where businesses or people rather and their supply chains can find a way to reuse and recycle materials, just like the way an ecosystem can find a way to recycle and reuse all of its components. And or through observing symbiotic relationships and finding personal balance, we can all find ways to learn from nature by immersing ourselves in it fully. And I think that would be why I believe that many more people these days are starting to find more value in experiences rather than material and tangible products. And Harris Group study that we actually were able to ask you all about earlier, were how many millennials prefer to spend money on experiences instead of material things. And that number is rather high, and that's good to see that, people are starting to, find the value and, the opportunities to travel and take from nature. And, that also presents a good opportunity to give back to it. And certain ways that we can practice getting back to nature from home, considering it's a little challenging at these times, would be to, for example, unplug from your screen and go green for at least 15 to 30 minutes a day. Set up a window in your apartment if you don't have access to a park or hiking trail, just for a nature viewing section. If it's available to you while physical distancing, take a hike, a walk, a bike around your neighborhood, and you can compare the amount of natural versus man-made objects around you. And if you have children or a big family, this is a really good opportunity to get everybody involved. Take photographs, compare the differences when you get back inside, talk about some of the, lessons and things that you observed and how you can transfer it over to your regular life. I think the great thing about nature is it allows you this opportunity to really immerse yourself in it, and then have a separate, a follow-up opportunity to reflect on that period of time. And I think that that's crucial, is that we are able to reflect on what we were just able to not escape from, but, kind of take in, and connect all the observations to how we can take responsibility to reduce the consumption of materials around us and, what we're using on a daily basis. A great book for that would actually be The Art of Noticing by Rob Walker. And it's a nice compilation of exercises to help expand the ways we engage with people, places, and objects, and, different things we encounter in our everyday lives, and has a nice element of perspective. And that'll lead us into, getting organized and getting involved. So essentially, climate change affects people's mental health through both the increased anxiety about uncertain futures, or the trauma people experience in climate-fueled natural disasters. And, both ways can certainly create a sense of powerlessness. But taking action in the face of a seemingly powerless situation, however, can help fight these feelings. Teachers, psychiatrists have reported that climate activism reduces mental health symptoms among young people. And psychiatrist Lise Van Susteren specializes in the psychological effects of climate change. And she says that youth climate activists use energy from their emotions to create change. And I think that that's very powerful, and that's something that we can all certainly tap into. And you can take individual action by organizing your lifestyle and everyday habits around zero waste. And it's important to recall the true meaning of zero waste. And I think that this can get tangled a lot of the time, that it's not about generating output at all. It's more about the lifestyle and the concept and the mindset of creating a closed loop system, just like how nature does in ecosystems, in which you can reduce and reuse resources as much as possible and divert what's essentially left over from landfills and incinerators. And, zero waste prioritizes upstream actions, which serves to eliminate waste from being generated in the first place. So getting involved in local or zero waste communities to see how others are going zero waste to get ideas is a great way to get started. Some of these action items could include researching, events in your neighborhood, getting your family and friends involved in local green events, such as cleaning up the park, or hosting online community discussions to get neighbors involved, how to address climate change and, reach towards those zero waste goals. And like we've mentioned, it's not just all or nothing. So just because you're 60% zero waste, that's still better than 40%. It's, it's a goal. It doesn't need to be all or nothing overnight. So don't get discouraged if you can't go 100% overnight. That's not the idea. It's, to make little changes to eventually get you towards, a mindset that values sustainability and zero waste. And, holding yourself accountable, that's the most crucial thing, because at the end of the day, it all comes down to what we're doing, not just individually, but as a giant unit. And with the extra time at home, now is an ideal time to take a step back and reflect on our individual environmental footprints by collectively holding ourselves accountable, taking responsibility. With it, taking responsibility for the impact of our choices, we can certainly create meaningful change. And a great way that we are, going to try to have everybody be able to do that on their own right now would be a 30-day roadmap to zero waste, which the Great Forest team has put together. And this is a nice screenshot of, some of the action items that you're going to be finding on the list. And it's essentially a 30-day series, which is going to help, flip the script on waste and help decrease our individual environmental footprints, which will, add to the bigger collection of decrease. And, just some simple actionable ways to help you get started on your journey from home. And everything essentially values the R items that we discussed earlier: reduce, reuse, recycle, and then, refuse, reassess, and rot within those items. And I think that you guys are going to really like what we put together here. It's a great opportunity to get the family involved, and each item builds on the last. And I think it's a nice, well-rounded 30-day opportunity for everyone to take a part of. And nobody can do everything, but everyone can certainly do something. While there's no silver bullet to addressing the climate crisis, we can certainly offer individual actions, all counting collectively towards a bigger goal, which would be to be more sustainable and value a zero waste mindset.
Thank you so much, Josh. I look forward to participating in our 30-day challenge in May. So let me pull up the polls so you guys can see the answers. I'll start with food waste. So what percentage of food is wasted in the US? It is 40%. So, I mean, that's a pretty even split. But yeah, it's a lot. It's a huge issue, and that's why we end up talking about food so much. In the home or in the commercial context, it's a huge part of our waste stream, and a lot of that waste is avoidable. Go to the next one. So this was a tricky one. It's actually lamb. Beef is right up there, but lamb is technically has the higher food print. Cheese is not too far behind meat. We give meat a bad rap, but cheese is not great either. But yeah, lamb is the answer. I want to know who the one person was. Good job. All right, and the last one. And half of you got this one right too. It was 72%. Yeah, unfortunately, part of that experiences over material things is the whole FOMO notion. If you didn't share it, it didn't happen. So that skews it up. But I think the general point is still not lost. More people would prefer to save their money and for travel than getting a bigger TV. And I think that's positive. Exploring the world. So let me go to a couple of our questions. And if you didn't, I think someone raised their hand earlier. Do you have a question? Yeah, you can unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. Right, if not, I will go. So the first question was, what did James say the 3 R's needs to change to? So he didn't completely change the 3 R's, actually, he added 2 R's. So it's reduce, refuse, reuse, recycle, and then rot, as in compost. And then how can we leverage the COVID-19 situation to have bigger conversations with clients related to the built environment? How has COVID-19 changed how we look at sustainability? So James added that COVID-19 is providing us with a type of dress rehearsal for what's expected to come, right? Like the idea of a pandemic was expected to happen. A lot of people predicted this. It was just a matter of time. And the notion is that like this is going to happen again if we don't make changes. You know, it's hard to say how often, but you know, it's something to take seriously. And so that dress rehearsal is in the sense of you know, addressing the complexity of mitigating and adapting to climate change, right? Like we can't completely mitigate. So part of that conversation has to be adaptation and resilience and you know, what we can do to make the impacts less bad. And oh, and then there's also the greater recognition that everything's connected and that you can't just do one thing without impacting everything else. So it really, we all have to work together. Like we've heard we're all in this together so much in the last couple months, but it's true. Like you really, there's so much interconnection, and you know, everyone has to play a role in this, and that's a great opportunity. And it, you know, there's a lot of inspiring things going on, but yeah, it's a lot of things that need to come together. And that starts at home. So how has COVID-19 changed how we look at sustainability? So it's teaching us to be thoughtful, careful, and science-based. We're having to think outside the box, right? Like be on our toes and find solutions just to things that you've never experienced before. I think also, you know, seeing those images, it's forced us to really see the impact humans make, right? Like our movement makes a difference. Scientists are able to hear a lot more now and understand earthquakes more because of the noise levels, right? And our footprint is huge. You know, our population was doubling every generation in the 20th century, right? Like that, our entire history, we were on, you know, a single trajectory that was, you know, kind of just going along in the same way, and then all of a sudden we have this huge jump. Like that's gonna change things. So James also said that one approach has worked well with Great Forest clients in San Francisco is that to show the life cycle of the materials they're using in hotels and office buildings. So explaining how everything fits into that life cycle helps people making those procurement decisions. So doing that environmentally preferable purchasing, as Kaylin mentioned. Okay, another question. Oh, where can we get the 30-day calendar? So we will send that out next week, and we'll be sending a couple things out next week. So we will include everyone who is on this invite in addition to everyone else we send it out to. What are the efforts being taken to put more onus on the manufacturers of products to consider the resources needed and the reuse recyclability of products instead of the end user only? So where I see this happening a lot is take-back programs. There's requirements for a lot of electronics stores like Best Buy, Staples, Office Depot, they actually take back a lot of different types of electronics that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Like Staples, I don't think of as having this robust, I wouldn't think to go to Staples necessarily to recycle different types of materials, but big stores like that end up having a lot of programs and are required to. Just like in cities like New York, where if a lot of businesses who produce single-use like plastic bags, they also have to accept those bags if they're a certain size. So there's the government requirement aspect, but then also when you have this push towards sustainability, when the consumer is pushing for better practices, that pushes companies in a better direction in terms of what they're offering to their customers based on that pressure. So there's examples like with beverage cartons. The Carton Council is why those are more recyclable than other types of materials, because the Carton Council invested in optical sorters that would enable those beverage cartons to be properly sorted within like the single stream recycling context, right? So that was the Carton Council not wanting their brand, so to speak, be associated with something that wasn't recyclable. Let's see. If recycling is required, why is organics optional still? Good question. I don't think it should be, but you know, that's my 2 cents. James says, from a climate action perspective, composting is an essential tool in preventing the discharge of methane from landfills. Even backyard or apartment composting can make a difference. Right, so for me, for example, since I moved to New York, so in DC, I had a private vendor who would pick up my organics bin like once a week, like a normal pickup service for trash and recycling, but it was a private vendor that I just paid a monthly thing for. And moving to New York, there are drop-off programs and pickup service, but only in certain parts of the city. And where I am in Brooklyn, I'm like right on the cutoff, so I only can do the drop-off. And so I had been doing that, but now with COVID, they've stopped the drop-off. And then we got news in the past week that they're stopping the curbside pickup for the organics cart too, which is an unfortunate reality because, you know, we know that emissions from food waste is part of the problem with air pollution, which then exacerbates situations with COVID, right? Because you're creating the air pollution leads to more disease, which leads to a susceptibility to getting really sick with these diseases like COVID, these respiratory diseases. So there's all these links, but cuts have to come from somewhere, and there's still this lack of emphasis on those links, and you have to make tough decisions. So luckily for me, I'm composting now in my backyard. I was afraid of what it was going to be like for pests because I'm in the middle of Brooklyn, but so far so good. I'm trying to like essentially bury it so it doesn't attract too much and mix all my browns and greens. So there's a couple different options. Also, to answer this organics optional, many jurisdictions in the US are not composting capable. Everyone can deal with home generated food waste. Commercial composting requires large areas and permitting for health safety. Also, there's situations where they're have been smell issues. There was this big facility in Delaware where a lot of Virginia, DC, Maryland jurisdictions were taking their food waste too. And that really changed the economy of organics in the Mid-Atlantic, because there's such a demand for the actual compost, but there's just not the infrastructure to be able to accept all that compost. And so that's also part of the answer is recycling infrastructure is there where the organics infrastructure isn't. So New York keeps expanding the organics requirements depending on what they can actually handle. And that's how the law is written. Let's see here. I will also, since we just have a couple more minutes, but I want to quickly address, we've been getting a couple questions about the onslaught of the single-use masks and gloves. These are materials, you're probably not surprised by this, these are materials that are hard to recycle, right? So if you're not a healthcare worker, use reusable, right? Try to limit the amount of waste you generate in the first place. Cloth masks, that might have an air filter in it, but that air filter you can take out when you wash the mask. And if it's not handled through like a hazardous waste bin, or there's no access to like a TerraCycle bin, then single-use gloves. If it's anything but latex, it has to go in the trash. If it's a natural latex, that can be composted as long as it's natural, from what I understand, because it's made from rubber trees. But yeah, avoiding single use is what we will harp on every time, because it really is true. Okay, I hope I answered everything. If we missed something or you have an additional question, please just email us at recycling@greatforest.com and we'll answer that for you. Oh, Dave also added to organics diversion, AKA composting. At home is pretty easy. You can use a tumbler or other equipment. Pretty cheap to get a pickup service. Yeah, I think mine was $25 a month and then went up all the way to $29 a month. So, you know, if it's just, it's more expensive to scale up, but if it's just you, it's generally not too costly. So to wrap things up, you know, I'll reiterate to join us on our 30-day challenge in May. You know, we intend this to be useful, give you useful tips, provide resources. We're going to be doing it ourselves. You know, I have my own food waste goals. We can always be doing something, right? What was it, that quote? I think, Josh, it was in one of your slides where, you know, it's the point being the collective whole is what makes a difference. And we'd rather, you know, 100 small actions than one person doing things perfectly. Right, so every little bit matters when taken collectively. So thanks, guys. Sorry it's 2 o'clock. We will be raffling off a gift card as a thank you. So we will be emailing you about that early next week. And also that's when we'll be sending the roadmap to you all. And we'll also, as part of the roadmap, be raffling off a zero waste starter kit at the end of the month, at the end of May. And so anyone who joins and joins us in participating and sends at least some form of, whether it's like a picture to show the actions that you're taking and a little blurb about what you're doing, we will enter you in that. And we hope you follow along with us. Thanks so much, everybody, and happy Friday, happy Earth Day. Hope you guys are holding up okay. I miss being on site and seeing everybody. Cheers.